What if we could practice for those most difficult moments that we'll face in competition? For those moments when your mind begins to unravel and self-doubt starts to creep in? How could this type of practice change our lives? Not only for sport, but for anything that requires mental toughness. Stay tuned for today's episode number 179 with Sun Sachs, the CEO and co-founder of Rewire Fitness, who will explore this very question with a human performance platform that he created, combining his passion with endurance sports and software development to create an app that many of us have been looking for, providing evidence-based solutions for tracking your readiness to perform, building mental resilience, and improving your mind-body recovery. For those who are new or returning guests, welcome. I'm Andrea Samadi, author and educator from Toronto, Canada, now in Arizona, and like many of you listening, have been fascinated with learning and understanding the science behind high-performance strategies that we can use to improve our productivity in our schools, our sports, and workplace environments. I can't even tell you how excited I am to share this new platform with you. At the time when mental resilience is crucial for the entire world, not just those who know the importance of mental toughness for sport, but for every one of us, myself included, this is a skill that requires daily practice. Every athlete knows the importance of mental resilience in sport and would tell you that 50 to 90% of what they do is mental when it comes to the focus and the precision needed for their performance. But if you ask them, how much time are you spending training your mind? Most will not have a solid answer for you. I receive many emails from people around the world with different ideas and suggestions for the podcast, and I'm laser focused with the direction that we're going and the speakers that we're looking for. But every once in a while, someone comes in front of me, and if I had read the email quickly or not taken the time to understand exactly what their product is, I would have missed an opportunity. And this was the case when I saw the email come in from Rosala Carrington from Rewire Fitness, and the heading of her email said, "First to market neuro performance for athletes." And in the body of the email, I saw something about an app that unlocks human performance with major investments from Under Armour and elite athletes such as NBA All-Star Kyle Korver. Even though it was busy times, I knew it was important to read the email properly. I read these headings: Sun Sachs' journey as an athlete and why he founded Rewire Fitness. I thought, yeah, I'd love to know this. Then they talked about why cognitive fatigue is a blind spot for most athletes. And I wondered what their solution was. They mentioned why most readiness trackers are using an incomplete data set. And yes, as a fitness tracker user, I've noticed this, and I wonder what they see is missing from the solution. They talk about tips for accelerating mind-body recovery. Yes, and I wonder what they were going to suggest. They talk about why the traditional way of building mental resilience is flawed. Exactly, and I don't have all the answers, but I know there's got to be a better way than pounding the pavement to improve mental resilience. This began my conversation with Rewire Fitness, and I can't even tell you how excited I am about the app. Now that I've signed up for the app, I'm a current user. I just couldn't resist using it before I created the questions. And after using the product, I kept emailing Rosala back with how impressed I was. So if you're an athlete or a regular person like me looking to take your performance to new heights, sit back and listen to this interview. And when it's over, I highly recommend going to their site, Rewire Fitness, and starting your own journey with their free trial they offer. Let's meet Sun Sachs, the CEO and co-founder of Rewire Fitness, and explore this app together. Welcome, Sun Sachs. It's incredible to see you again. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. I'm very excited to chat with you. I think there's a lot of sort of shared vision and goals in common that we have. So excited to get into it.
Oh, I'm so excited. And son, it's just been a couple of weeks since Rosella Carrington sent me that email introducing me to your work. And I really do feel like we've known each other for much longer. And I'm not sure, maybe it's because I listened to your podcast of you hiking and all the stories that you mentioned in there. I just felt so connected to you, and I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. And it wasn't difficult for me to see what you've created fills a need that I noticed when I started tracking HRV to measure performance. But could we start out with when you saw this need and what it took to create this app to fill it?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I mean, to go back a little bit further, just to sort of give some context for the listeners. So I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and which is definitely at the time and to this day is a sort of a epicenter for endurance sports. So I had the opportunity to get involved in bike racing at an early age, and I worked my way up to an elite level. I ended up sort of suffering from burnout and getting a knee injury and having to end my career prematurely. And I also never really reached the pinnacle of sort of success that I wanted to. So that stuck with me. And, I spent 15 years, pursuing, basically wanting to become, a successful professional athlete. And then another 20 years thinking about what went wrong and how to improve. And I've never stopped. So that's sort of the backdrop and the motivation. And like you, I discovered HRV pretty early, actually. About 11 years ago, I was doing a quantified self and really just literally was looking at every possible metric, subjective, objective, heart rate data. HRV wasn't very popular back then. And I just looked at all of the measures physiologically, and HRV seemed to be the most correlative to sort of my adaptation to training and, my recovery. And so I put that aside. Okay, this is a metric I can use and rely on. But then, I still felt like there was something missing and I couldn't sort of put my finger on it. I started pursuing meditation. I got involved with sort of one of the leading yoga centers, in the United States, started in the 20s. If you've ever read the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, it's an amazing book. Pretty metaphysical stories, of India and the masters. And so I basically got involved in that program and started meditating upwards of 3 to 4 hours a day, and literally signed a life oath to never reveal any of the secrets. And I kept meditating. Got to a level where they basically revealed all of the secrets, or at least the secrets that that they said they would reveal at that level. And for me, what I realized was it's incredible practice. Couldn't recommend it more highly, but for me, it didn't really fit into my lifestyle. And so, meaning it was actually stressing me out, getting up really early and trying to squeeze in 2 hours before the day and 2 hours after the day. But I recognized the value, and I recognized the sort of the ability to observe yourself and to have more of an even keel, sort of less emotionality and, more observation and more self-awareness. So that, again, I sort of put in my toolkit. This is something really important. And then a few years after that, I became aware of the science, which came out originally in 2009 around resilience training. And that training had never come to market in terms of a commercial product. So basically what they did in the lab is they would have somebody either on a treadmill or on a bike trainer, and they'd put a keyboard with the monitor, and you'd basically do this sort of brain training while you're working out, and it would layer on a specific type of cognitive fatigue that would lead to performance. But it's a pretty tricky problem to solve to sort of commercialize that. And it wasn't until probably around early 2018, I was on the bike trainer and had an epiphany for how it could be done. And with my 25 years in software development, basically it was just like, okay, let's make a prototype. Did that with my original co-founder in a few weeks. We started beta testing. And as we learned more, sort of we expanded the product from resilience to really pulling in that sort of a way to get the benefits of mindfulness without the level of expertise that you need. And then the last piece is we brought back in the insights from HRV, but in a more holistic way. So it was a very long journey getting here. And it was really just pursuing, self-improvement, sort of how it started.
Well, I didn't know that because not everything we do works out. And sometimes people look at you and would see, oh, wow, look, you've created this app, probably like overnight success kind of idea, not knowing the trials that have gone beforehand. And it was very similar for me. Not everything I've ever done has worked out. And, when something does, you go with it, but in the back of your head, you've got, well, this better work out because of all the work you've done beforehand, which is what I think gave you the resilience, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Keep.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that in my life and my life history that have built resilience through my environment and my life experience. And thankfully, that was a tool that I used in order to really help bring this into being with my other co-founders. So been a labor of love, 3 years of development to bring it to market. And we, went live in early September this year.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that quick, and I'm so glad you found me because obviously you picked the right person when you found me with the email. I was just hooked right away. I saw I think it was Under Armour and then the pro athlete and then brain training. And I thought, what is this? Just be. And it was pretty easy for me to see it. And I know that we don't all need to be pro athletes to know that when it comes to sport, we all know how to train the body. But can you explain what happens if we're missing out on cognitive training and why cognitive fatigue is a blind spot for athletes or anyone looking to improve their mental toughness?
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk to any athlete, and we're very much talking about, the regular athlete that's not a professional, that just spends their quality time and money and resources to juggle their hectic life so that they can get better physically and improve. When we talk to them, they all say sort of that the mental component is at least 50% of their performance. But then when we ask them sort of, well, how much time do you spend training the mind? Like you said, there's really not a good answer. And, so everybody intuitively understands it. But historically, what people typically tend to do is they just say, okay, I'm going to push myself really hard today. And that's going to make me mentally tough. And in some respects, that's true, but it's a very blunt instrument. So you're essentially, as a side effect, you're getting a little more mental resilience because you have to endure that physical training. And it works for sure, but it's the amount of volume and effort you have to put into it to get a sliver of resilience is, frankly, in many cases, not worth it and not very sustainable. So if you're just going to beat yourself up every single day, eventually your body will break down. And then what? You can only get so much resilience out of that type of training. And the other side of it, to your other question, is, cognitive fatigue. That has a material impact on all kinds of performance, including athletic performance. And it's not something we think about. These days recovery is there's a lot of sort of cachet behind it, and people are excited about all the tools and the ice baths and the breathing and all that stuff, which is fantastic and it's effective, but they're totally overlooking if it's 50% or 80% of your performance, they're not recovering the mind like they would recover the body. So if you think about you're going into a workout, a good sort of thought experiment, which I think most of us have experienced, is you're planning a workout. It's at the end of the day due to your schedule. You have a long, hectic work day, because most of us have day jobs. And at the end of that day, now you have to motivate yourself to go to the gym, go for a run. It's pretty hard to motivate yourself, right? Motivation is certainly impacted by cognitive fatigue. But if you actually got to the gym, went out for the run, it will actually, in most cases, feel harder. And that's because your brain is artificially inflating your perception of effort, which has been proven in that early research I mentioned to be a limiter to performance. So in other words, if you're doing the run and it feels harder, what happens? You start to take your foot off the gas. You start to wrestle with negative self-talk. You start to think, maybe I'm close to my house. I'll just wrap it up right now. I'm having a bad day. Yeah. So just like the body, we need to, strengthen the mind and also recover the mind is basically the approach that we take.
And we know this, but I don't know why we don't talk about it as often as we would talk about, well, what are you doing for your training? Or, how long are you doing your training? No one's asking, how long are you doing your mental training?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And there's pockets of it in elite sport. Obviously when you can afford to have a sports psychologist full-time helping you, there's self-talk visualization. But what we're providing is a system so that it is a structured way to recover and a structured way to become more mentally resilient, as opposed to just like, hey, today I'll just push myself a little harder and I hope I get a little more mentally resilient. And there's no way to measure it and there's no way to know if it really worked. And you may be going in with a lot of fatigue. So maybe today's a bad day to do that. And it's just a flip of a coin. It could be a terrible experience. It could be a good experience. But what we like to do is just provide some structure and some insight so that you can objectively make the right decisions.
Yeah, I remember, I don't go to baseball games that often, but I was at a baseball game once in Arizona and I noticed one of the players was meditating and he was off to the side. And I thought, of course I'm going to pick that up. I thought, look at that guy. He's, I told my kids, he's doing his meditation and prayer and everything. But I just thought after I found you, I thought, wouldn't it be a good system if he did that all beforehand and then he was with the rest of the team because he was separated from everyone and off doing his own thing, but then he's no longer a part of the team and they're all throwing the ball around. So I just thought, wouldn't it be neat if they did their mind training separate and then came together as a team? That's when the cohesion would have happened. That's just what I saw looking at it.
Yeah. Good for him for doing that. And, that's challenging and reflective of how it is for a lot of us. So like, when can you find a quiet space to go meditate? Or you're not going to typically meditate in front of your coworkers. You have to find some way to help yourself that fits into the reality or the context of your lifestyle. That's the way we built the mindset recovery system, which I'm sure we'll get into, but it basically allows you to do it. You can put the earbuds in, look at the screen or not look at the screen, and while you're working, get some recovery benefit. And that, just being more realistic, sort of modernizing the approach so that you can do it when you need to is key. Because what we want is some consistency,
Yeah, definitely. So could we do that? Could we go into the 3 parts of the app and I'll introduce each part. If you could give the science behind it just to make sure that we all understand what's happening at the brain level. Each part. Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah.
Perfect. So part 1, I would say, is the readiness assessment. So I wake up at the same time every morning. Before I grab my coffee, I'm going to grab my phone that has my app on it and I do my readiness assessment and I'm looking for consistency It's going to track my lapses and misses, my cognitive fatigue, my readiness. But what is exactly happening? What's the science behind this readiness assessment that you mentioned came from the military?
Yes. So, definitely you have to be able to measure your current state and measure your progress over time. So that became a very important piece to what we do. When it comes to the science behind it, first off, we do also take into account your physiology and your sleep and your heart rate and your training load. We'll bring that all in from third-party apps like Oura Ring or Apple Health or heart rate monitors and so on. So we have that. And then as a morning practice, what we ask the subject to do is basically do a cognitive test, which is a short 90-second test, and it's a psychomotor vigilance test, which has been used in the military for soldier readiness, as well as in sleep studies. You'll find it a lot. So it's highly correlative to cognitive fatigue. And basically what happens is you see the shape. It's a little game. You see the shape. You tap the screen every time you see the shape. And we track down to the millisecond your reaction time, as you said, misses and lapses, accuracy. And what that tells us is basically, compared to your baseline, how are you doing today? Normally it takes you, let's say, 300 milliseconds to tap on the button every time. This time it's 325 milliseconds. You're X percent off your baseline. Oh, look at this. You also had some more lapses. A lapse would be like, and we've all experienced this outside of this test, just for a moment, you space out. That's a lapse. And if you're having more lapses than normal, that's a clear indication that you have a higher level of cognitive fatigue. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is straight out of NASA. We basically use a subjective scale to analyze your emotional readiness to perform. And it's basically what they use for astronauts, where there's a high bar in terms of their performance. In some cases, it may be life or death or very critical decisions they have to make. And they need a way to not only look at the physical, but also look at the emotional and subjective sort of perspective, because that does add sort of information to the overall analysis. So we take the reaction time test, the NASA subjective questions, and the physiological data. We take all of that together automatically, and our algorithm basically says, here's where you're at on a score from 0 to 100. So it's very easy to understand. I was 60 yesterday, I'm 71 today, and so on. But then what's pretty unique is that then it'll tell you, okay, cognitively, you're at 90%. Emotionally, you're at 30%. Physically, you're at 50%. So you might have been very well aware that you were physically at 50%, but that emotional piece, you may not have been aware of at all.
For sure.
And the cognitive piece, how would you know? How would you know if you're sharp today or fatigued? You're not used to looking at that or trying to analyze that, and there's no hard metrics to understand it. So that whole system sort of basically gives you an objective view of where you're at, which is the first step.
That's interesting, because I understood definitely the, as I'm doing the test daily, that's exactly what I thought. Hey, how does it know that I was scoring lower on the emotional when I feel like I might have been off one day, and I don't know if it was an answer I provided. I thought, how did it pick that up? Was it something I did, or is there more to it than that? How would it pick up?
Yeah. I mean, essentially, there are 12 data points that the system uses, and they're all weighted, and they're all bucketed into the emotional, cognitive, and physical category. So, and some of them overlap. So, for example, sleep is going to affect your cognitive recovery as well as your physical recovery. You could argue emotional too, but in our case, we have that metric shared between those two buckets. Other things, like if you indicate in the questionnaire, which is short, as you saw, it's like 4 questions and then some information about your lifestyle. But if you say I'm frustrated on a scale of 0 to 100, Normally you say 3, and today you say 6. It's going to pick up on that, and it's going to say, wait a second. Frustration has a lot to do with sort of your emotionality. And so it's going to pick up on that and sort of, adjust the score accordingly. And, when you have a lot of cognitive fatigue too, you have less cognitive control, which means you stop thinking rationally and you start to get more emotional. And that it'll pick up on that as well.
Oh, that's good. I love it. So let's take that to part 2. So now I've done my assessment. Now I'm going into my mindset recovery that I can do perhaps pre-workout to put me in the right mindset, or if I'm an athlete for competition mindset, or even if I have a big podcast presentation to reduce stress. And I love the affirmation and the binaural beats. I put my headset on for that part. But can you explain what's happening in mindset recovery and how it's reducing stress or preparing me for competition?
Yes. So what happens is you do your readiness. We now understand a lot of context about how you are today compared to yesterday and the day before and so on. So, for example, let's just say we pick up that you have a greater amount of cognitive fatigue and maybe physical as well. What the system will do is basically create or architect a recovery system for you based on your needs that day. So it's not enough to just say, hey, looks like you got a bad night's sleep, looks like you're physically depleted, take a day off. Because obviously you can't. You have your big presentation, or you have some trade, or you have a big hike, or whatever it is. Guess what? You still have to perform. So what you do is you click the button for the recovery session, and it'll basically create a recipe. And sort of the magic formula in that is that it's not just saying use an affirmation, use visualization, or do breathing. It's actually combining all of those things together based on your areas of need. So, you'll oftentimes start with a breathing modality. That could be anything from pranayama to box breathing to 4-7-8. We have a lot of others as well. That's going to get you potentially, depending on the goal, either into a parasympathetic state or a sympathetic state. If it's pre-workout, we may want to get you into a sympathetic state so you're primed. If you're trying to recover, definitely parasympathetic. And then while you're doing that, you're listening to quote unquote relaxing music, which, as you said, is binaural beats blended into the background. That's basically 2-tone frequencies, which create a phenomenon known as brain entrainment, where your brain perceives the 2 frequencies, one in one ear that's a different range, and another in another ear, in the other ear that's a different range. And it combines that or translates it into a 3rd frequency. That 3rd frequency is the binaural beat. And what that does is essentially your brain perceives this low-level wave, and we can broadcast, hey, get into a sleep state, get into a meditative state, get into a focus state. And it's going to basically encourage your neurology to get into that state. And we could talk about the science behind it, but it's fascinating. And then we'll bring in things like, as you mentioned, self-talk, which you can program, visualization cues, so you get into sort of a good mindset, or think about what's important. Maybe think about sort of a gratitude message. And then lastly, we also, depending on your state, we may bring in subliminal priming, which is that's straight out of science fiction, but there's solid science behind it, in that because we're social animals and we take many of our fight or flight cues off of each other. So in other words, in a group setting, think of it like a sort of a herd mentality. If one person in the herd is freaking out and scared, the rest of the herd is going to go, uh-oh, let's get ready. So in our case, what we're doing is we're priming the person with basically positive imagery. And that's going to tell your physiology, your deep, old physiology, hey, you're in a safe environment. You can be you can be in a homeostasis. You can be relaxed. You can let your guard down. And that's going to help with cognitive recovery as well. So all of these things work together in one cohesive experience that's anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes.
Oh my goodness. So you just put everything that I ever learned from this speaker I used to work for all in 2 to 5 minutes. And there's so much there. It could be for a CEO who's got to lead their team. And like you said, that everyone feeds off of the leader. Or it could be, for me that I've got to calm myself down and I'm choosing to use this mindset recovery. And I also love how you used it when you didn't get enough sleep on your alpine hike because you had to get up at midnight. And that's the case for a lot of people. They have to travel and the schedule says, well, you got to go at 3 in the morning. That's where you know that you haven't had a good sleep, but what's the solution? There isn't one until
Exactly.
now, right?
That's yeah. The reality is we always want to get a good night's sleep, but we don't always, right? And when you don't, what do? You got to do, ideally you got to do something to help yourself. So what this lets you do is basically you could do what I did on the Alpine climb is I just did hour-long back-to-back binaural beat sessions in place of sleep because it was basically 3 hours of climbing. 3 days of climbing where I got 6.5 hours sleep total. And then we had to, summit. So I'm trying to summit being cognitively sharp with 6.5 hours sleep over 3 days. I'm going to
Right.
do everything I can to be to be prepared. And thankfully we had the app, which also works offline. So we're able to use the product, without any connectivity. So
So I thought about that for people sitting on a plane. That's that frustrating time when everyone's trying to put their bag somewhere. And it's like I always just plug into something, but then when the plane takes off, if I don't have the internet, some of my programs don't work.
yes,
So I love that you could just keep using your system and and relax yourself while you're on the plane. That's great.
yeah, that's right. I've definitely used it on the plane as well.
Mhm. Love it. So, and then part three is the neurotraining. And this is the part of the program that builds my resilience and prepares me for those difficult times that we've all got to face. And with daily practice, I'm working on my willpower muscles and strengthening this part of my brain. Can you explain this part and how this is a better approach than the method that I told you I was using before to build resilience? I think you called it the hammer approach, which was just, keep working out and build that mental resilience. That's all I knew how to do. But it took too much time. So I've been looking to do something different to build resiliency and mental strength. So if you could explain this
Yes,
part.
absolutely. So, yeah, the science originally came out in 2009. And basically what they did is they had the test subjects do, this certain type of brain training called response inhibition, which is basically impulse control. And so the questions that they ask are not intuitive and requires a little bit more discernment. And what we do is with our system, we'll ask in a 10 to 15-minute mental workout, we'll ask over 1,000 questions. And so you can imagine how that would sort of overload your brain. And what's cool about it is because it's focused on response inhibition, it targets a specific area of the brain known as the anterior cingulate cortex. And that part of the brain is responsible, it's not the only aspect of your brain, but it's a big part of decision making, self-control, essentially trying to achieve something with a goal, sort of a goal-oriented mindset. And the last piece is it impacts or is the main mitigator based on the research on your perception of effort. And so what you perceive is what you experience, right? And what the system does is it basically overloads that part of your brain. It creates an adaptation, and that adaptation results in a generic improvement in your resilience. And why I say generic is because your brain, when it comes to managing fatigue, there could be any number of causes, but if you have more resilience, it's going to help you if you're just trying to put in a few more hours of work, if you're in a very stressful situation where you need to double down, if you're in sport. So it's not about getting good at the test. It's about just creating an adaptation like you would in the gym where you're stressing your muscles out, and they're adapting to that stimulus. We do the same thing with brain training.
Yeah, I think when we first talked, I was kind of comparing it to like hormesis, or when you go in a sauna. That's why going in a sauna is good for you, because it's building your resilience to heat, and it's making your body fight. It's the same thing with your brain, right? It's pushing you to fight mentally. Would that be a good way to look at it?
Yeah, I mean that's you're basically accelerating what you would normally feel if you pushed your body really hard physically, or if you just, again, had to endure something difficult. What we're doing is accelerating that by giving a very highly targeted test that actually, the more you do it, the more the system will adapt to you and continually up the difficulty. So there's no real way to ever get good at it, but you definitely can adapt over time. And when they look at the differences between like a professional athlete and an amateur athlete, the professional athletes generally have a greater level of fatigue resistance to this test. And that's because they've, either nature, nurture, whatever their backstory is, they've been able to really create a greater level of resilience. And we can achieve that too through this structured training. So you do it, you can do it. The system will basically suggest the frequency, but you could do it. Typically, we recommend 3 to 4 sessions a week, between 10 and 15 minutes each session. And that's enough. That's enough to create an adaptation.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And for someone who measures everything, I noticed this data set that was missing, and I'm wearing 3 trackers, and I'm noticing that there's something that's left off the table. And it started when I did this podcast on with talking about HRV, and someone said, well, are you using breathing? And I thought, well, yeah, but probably not as consistently as I could. I didn't have a method that I was using consistently and measuring it. And then I was glad to see that you didn't put this in a wearable device, so that I have like all these bands on my arm.
A force device.
I know. I thought I'm trying to get rid of some of these. But I was glad to see that we could learn this skill set through an app that's standalone. So thanks so much for creating that part. Was that intentional? You thought, I don't want to wear another band?
Yeah, I'm like you. I have several devices on at all times. So the other piece of it is just that, there are some high quality devices and they do capture useful information, but as individuals, we're left to figure it all out. We have to look at, if we're wearing an Oura ring, we have to look at our sleep and readiness and HRV and, respiration. And if we have the Apple Watch, hey, we're looking at our SpO2 and we're looking at our Apple Health and we're looking at our steps, and like, what is helping us understand the big picture? So our system doesn't require you to, one, even have a device, but if you do, it's just additive. It's additive to the data, and it will hone in, more accurately, specifically on the physical side. But you could literally use the app with no device and get a lot of benefit out of it.
Got it.
So that was definitely intentional. Yeah.
Got it. Perfect. So I listened to obviously all your podcasts, but the one where you talked about is phenomenal. I loved it. So the one where you talked about your cyclist study and how brain training improved their results by 120%, that's phenomenal.
Yes.
Can you kind of revisit that and talk about any other outstanding stats that you saw?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's an interesting one because, again, we're not talking about professional athletes. The researchers, some of whom we work with directly, what they basically did is they took 30 amateur athletes and they trained them for 3 months on a bike trainer. They'd have to go to the lab, and 3 times a week they would, do a 60-90 minute bike trainer session. The control group just did the physical training, and the variant group, or the test group, they basically did that with the keyboard attached to their bike, doing the cognitive training that we have in our system. And basically, after the 3 months, the control group improved by 40%, which is kind of what you'd expect if they're amateur athletes and they're training very consistently. They're going to see improvement, which is great. And then the brain train group, they improved by 120%, as you said. And where they improved was specifically around the sort of the most difficult part of the test. So how they measured it is basically at several intervals during the test, during that 3-month period, they did a time to exhaustion test, which is basically where you set a fixed power output, which is basically a measurable level of effort on the bike, and you go until you can't pedal anymore. So you're going to the very end of your limit. And basically the brain trained folks went 5 minutes longer on average than the non-brain trained folks. And that's significant, especially in sport. That 120% or even just simply 5 minutes better on a sort of an hour bike training session is a major gain. Now, most people focus on how can I improve by a fraction of a percent? Right. So yeah, that was pretty phenomenal. The other research that I would share is on the recovery side, they basically took the same type of cohort where you have a group of meditators and a group of non-meditators, and what they did is they subjected them all to 90 minutes of cognitive fatiguing tasks, which included some of the things we have in our system and additional ones, to really make sure they were sort of cooked mentally. So that's 90 minutes, which is very difficult. We don't recommend that normally within our system. And basically then they had the meditators who have experience meditating go off and meditate for 15 minutes, and the non-meditators just listen to binaural beats. Then they measured their level of cognitive fatigue, and the non-meditators who just passively listened to the music, didn't do anything explicitly, had a greater level of cognitive recovery. So, just showing how there is an alternative to meditation that can have a similar efficacy and a similar benefit and can be done more flexibly is powerful and exciting. That's one of the reasons we integrated it.
Oh, it's interesting because listening to that, you also don't know when someone's meditating how they're meditating. I've brought that point up, just because
True.
Plugging in, you don't know how are you doing it. Are you doing it with the right amount of focus? Are you engaged in what the person's saying, or are you just zoned out?
Yeah.
So there's so much to this.
There really is. And you're not going to get, if you're using one of the meditation apps, they're not going to give you a meditation score. You're not going to your point, you're not going to know how you did.
Right.
There's a qualitative piece to it, which is very important. But what our system also does is you can wear a heart rate monitor, and we'll show you specifically how the recovery system impacted your physiology in each stage. So you might say wow, my HRV improved in that session, in that part of the session. Or look at my resting heart rate went down, when I was doing the visualization. So that just gives you more information about, maybe what sessions to repeat or what things really resonate with you. And the good thing is, because our recipe includes all these different modalities, there's a higher probability that it's going to have some strong efficacy. It's just, you're placing a lot more bets, and there's a lot more opportunities that it's going to help you. And we'll also measure, of course, subjectively how you feel, which is very important. But you get basically the subjective and objective data after you do the session.
Right. What do you think it was that got those cyclists to improve their results by 120%? When I hear that, I think, how sometimes a trainer pushes you and they say,
right,
you can do it, you can go another 5 minutes, and you're thinking there's no way. Is there something in the app that's like that gives you that sort of self-belief, like a trainer pushing you? Do you think that was behind it?
So we definitely have, we focus. So when you look at mental toughness, and some really interesting research was done where they basically took 600, competitive endurance athletes, and they tried to break down all the attributes of mental toughness. And, one of them, is clearly self-belief and confidence, right? Those two things. So, which is kind of intuitive. But the other one was cognitive control, which really comes down to, what do you tell yourself when things get difficult? Do you start to go negative? Do you start to go positive? And sort of that internal dialogue that you have with yourself. So what we have in the app is a self-talk program where we use researched self-talk phrases, but even better is if you kind of personalize one and make it your own. And it's something you can repeat as a cognitive cue to get into the right mindset, and to sort of push away some of that negative self-talk, which is definitely not going to help. That taps into your energy physically and mentally, and if you have that sort of cycling as a negative mantra, it's not going to help you in pretty much any respect. Some people are motivated negatively, but in general, it's not going to be good for you. So yeah, that's one of the solutions we have for that purpose.
I love it. And that kind of goes into one of the questions that I wanted to ask about how it's preparing us for life in general. It's not just for athletes, it's helping us to catch those moments outside of sport, just when something, like you said, unravels. And then we have
Yeah.
that mental strength to stop that.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the research is, when they, after they see that adaptation, so give it 6 weeks, you start to see an adaptation in your resilience. When it really kicks in is when you need it the most. So it's almost like, I know you probably know this term, an adaptogen, in terms of just like, different types of amazing ingredients around the world that are going to sort of help you out when you need it most. This resilience is kind of like an adaptogen, in that, in the research, the subjects would have an increased amount of resilience in the first workout, but then if they compounded it by having them do a second difficult workout the same day, their resilience went up even higher. So like, I did this bike race a few weeks ago, and it was this very interesting format where you basically do 3 races in one day. And I felt the strongest at the end of the day on the third race, and that's where you want it. You want it when you need it most, right? So building, spending the time to, and it's not a lot of time, but consistently training your mind, leads to this type of resilience that you can apply to a lot of different things. Building an app, going on a hike, recovering from, a lot of different challenges. So yeah, it's got to be balanced with cognitive recovery, but it's something that's very important, and can be done and can be accessible to people.
This is so good. I love it. So I had to listen to your hike up Mount Rainier, and how you compared that hike to Mount Everest. And I'd interviewed on episode 45 someone who hiked up Everest and talked all about the preparation before. And I couldn't help thinking about how this app could have helped him before and during the hike. But here's something that I thought was phenomenal that you talked about. Can you explain how the app helps us to deal, like we've just been talking about, that mental strength that we've got to generate to prevent something from unraveling? And let's just say we're on a mountain, it could cause death.
Yeah.
Or like losing a game, it could be a death for an athlete, like losing a game, or preventing a life situation from getting worse. Can you take us through like how we actually can stop with our mental resilience these things from happening?
Yeah. I mean, in a crisis, or in a really challenging situation, you want to be in a calm, ready state. You don't want to be in a panic state, because that actually just, you lose energy, right? You lose the energy that you should be putting towards helping you perform, get out of a crisis, etc., is being wasted by that mental energy, that cycling negative energy. And so what you want to do is, you either use these protocols, meditate, use other techniques to be able to, resiliency is really about being flexible, being adaptable to the circumstance. And so this type of training, both the recovery piece as well as the resilience piece, puts you in that place where you have to overcome adversity a lot. And what's great about that is you get time to practice. It's kind of like the Stoic approach, right? Where the Stoic philosophers encourage people to prepare for those difficult times in life, so that when they did happen, they actually already had experienced some of it. So it wasn't a shock. It wasn't something that they were unprepared for or was new to them. So the resilience training, you just get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's less of a trigger when it happens. So it's easier to be in a calm state because you're like, oh, I've been through this before. I've been through this state where I'm like, I don't think I can get through this. The app is going, what the app will do is if you start to answer the questions wrong, it becomes kind of a cascading effect. So it sort of like snowballs. You don't want, you don't want that to happen. So, it's really just about being able to practice being in those states and have the tools to learn how to maintain that sort of calmed, ready state is how I would put it.
Got it. Now, so we're doing this standalone. I'm doing the app on my own, but then you talked about something that's important. You're tied to somebody else on that mountain, and how they perform impacts your life. And think about like a team, how a team performs impacts the results. So we can't be in control of anybody else's thoughts and mindset, but how would you say that this would be important for you keeping the guy behind you calm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. And I remember that moment that you're describing where we're tied together. There's a thunderstorm. We're hiking up a pretty difficult piece of rock, and if I trip, if he trips, if the guy in front of me trips, we all go down. And, again, we have to remember that we're social animals. So if one person panics, we're much more likely to panic. So if I can keep myself together and I can be calm and I can have enough self-awareness, which is what I was trying to do in this moment, to think ahead for the person behind me. Hey, there's this difficult thing right here. Hey, be careful. I'm now giving them support, right, while I'm also maintaining my own cool. And that's how I would say, sort of in that particular example, it's important and it does impact other people. In other examples, we do work with some teams, and we're in beta testing with a team's dashboard, and it's great for the coach to be able to see like, hey, these two athletes have a lot of emotionality today, and I can see they didn't get enough sleep, and I can see that they're cognitively not as sharp. Maybe I won't just do my coach thing that I normally do where I push everybody really, really hard and I see if they respond. Maybe it's not such a good idea with these two. Having the data makes the difference,
Wow. So on that, I did notice that you were doing a beta program, and I wondered, do you have a dashboard for certain sports? Do you have it separated like that, or how do you have that beta section?
Yeah, we have a wide variety of people in the beta. Professional athletes, athletes of all kinds, strength athletes, MMA fighters, runners, triathletes, climbers, you name it, we have them in the beta. And what's great having that diversity is that we see common themes, and we also see things that are maybe very specific, like the challenges, depending on what degree of mental the sport is. Like, for instance, swimming, it's a head game. It's skill-based sport. You're in your head in a pool, with very little gravity, and it's all about it's all about the mental game. So, like, what kind of tools do they need versus what kind of tools does maybe like a strength athlete need? Thankfully, the system's flexible to be used by all those different types of athletes, but maybe they need a little more emphasis on recovery, or resilience training and so on. I was talking to a pro athlete who's a pro soccer player in Europe last week, and he was talking about how he had a big game, where it's basically the number one team and his team. And he was really nervous, as would be expected. And he, a little bit before the game, he talked about the baseball player meditating. He was like, Rewire. And he went and did, a couple minutes of the Rewire recovery. And then he had a great game, And so he was able to just calm himself down, get into that ready state. And those kinds of stories and those kind of use cases are really what the beta is about, is so we can learn how to continue to optimize it. We're an app, built for athletes by athletes, and we're very empathetic to all the challenges. And of course, we also there's a lot of frontline workers that are really interested in the product. They're going through an incredible amount of stress. We do see some, military applications and some, we just want people to be as prepared mentally, physically, emotionally for whatever challenge they face. So that's a lot. That's pretty much everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, which is why I loved it myself when I saw this. And what would be the vision for where you're going?
Yeah, we're building a piece of hardware it's definitely not a wearable, but essentially it's a device you can use, you hold in your hands, and it allows you to layer on cognitive training while you go out for a run, while you're in the gym. It basically allows you to sort of have that complement of brain training with physical training, which from everybody who's beta tested it, I'll put this in air quotes, but they say it's fun, right? It adds another dimension to you feel like you've really worked out physically and mentally, and that's pretty satisfying. It also is kind of nice these days with COVID, where you're a little bit bored with your sports equipment, so having something else to do while you're doing it's kind of fun. So that's something we've been working on, and it'll probably be mid next year that it rolls out. We think about, depending on the individual, but a lot of us think about performance and getting better and challenging oneself over and over again. But you have to remember that the way we adapt is in the recovery phase. You don't actually get stronger when you're in the gym. You get stronger when you're out of the gym resting. So the important part to all of this, as well as sort of pushing yourself, is self-care and getting into a routine, even if it's just a few minutes where you're taking care of yourself every day. Maybe it's making a cup of tea and just unloading. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's doing the recovery stuff that we have in our app. But I think that's really important, especially these days. It just gives you some perspective. We have such a crazy go mentality and culture these days that it's a precious thing just to give yourself a little bit of time.
It really is, and that's coming at the perfect time for me to hear this, when I haven't been on the mountain. I'm going up for 8 days now, and I hadn't taken a day off in a couple of years. So this has been a powerful time to get away from the mountain and do something different. I love the app. It's been phenomenal for me.
So glad to hear it.
Absolutely. Well, Sun, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For anyone listening who wants to try out the app, I'll put the link in the show notes and they can click on it and do the free trial. And I just want to thank you so much for your time today. Like I mentioned when we first spoke, I'm going to be a lifetime member. I'll continue to follow your vision. I want to thank you for all you're doing to help build mental toughness and resilience for those of us who've been looking for a new way to accomplish this. So best of luck on the future of this app and all you're doing to prepare the world for mental and physical toughness.
Thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure, and look forward to future conversations.
Absolutely.